Hello everyone! So today I'm going to go over a video that'll hopefully help you plan out your garden, because that's what winter is for, is putting all the plans in place before we get to start actually sowing and planting outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the pros and cons of the different containers that I use in my garden to help you figure out which containers might work best for you. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list of every single container type, because technically you can turn anything into a container as long as there can be drainage holes added to it. I mean, you can add in galvanized tubs, grocery bags, basically anything you can think of. But what I'm going to cover in this video are the container types that I use most frequently and that I feel like other people use most frequently as well. So what I have here is a grow bag, terracotta pot, plastic pot, and a ceramic pot. And I'm going to go over, because I use all of them in my garden and I use them in different ways or for different things. So I think they all do serve a purpose, but I want to go over what I found over the last 5 years in my container garden is the benefit and then some of the drawbacks to these different container types. The first category, which I think is probably the most asked, is cost. So I've ordered them here from least expensive to most expensive. And again, that's going to vary based on the container itself. But in general, grow bags are going to be the cheapest option for you by far, especially as you get into larger sizes. For example, this here is a very nicely folded up, I have not unfolded it yet, 30-gallon grow bag. So this I have measured before because I have some out in my front garden right now. It's where I grow indeterminate tomatoes, my giant zinnias, and I don't just grow one indeterminate tomato. I'll throw in some other plants as well. I've actually grown 2 in one of these grow bags, but I got a pack of 5 for $30. That comes out to about $6 for one 30-gallon grow bag. You are not going to find any other 30-gallon container in any other type of material that's going to be $6. If somehow you know of one, let me know, but I can't even imagine the cost of a 30-gallon, let's say, terracotta or ceramic planter. It would be hundreds of dollars. So if you're looking for a cheap option, especially if you need larger sizes, grow bags are going to be the cheapest option for you. Now, next are terracotta pots. I find in general I can find these pretty cheap, especially as they get a bit larger, but also plastic pots, depending on the size, they can be roughly similar. There's definitely more of a price jump going from a grow bag to one of these than going from between terracotta and plastic. Again, it's going to vary based on the specifics of the pot itself. But typically with these terracotta pots, when I'm getting them at places like Home Depot, they're under $10 each. And then obviously I'm talking about for this 8-inch pot here. And then this one, which is probably also about a gallon, I think this was like $7 for one of these pots. So technically this might be a little bit cheaper for the size. But I find that as I get larger and larger terracotta, they stay cheaper than larger and larger plastic pots. Like some of my plastic pots that I have that are maybe 16 inches in diameter are like somewhere between $30 to $50 for a pot. And I feel like terracotta, at least the plain terracotta, doesn't get quite as expensive, but these two are more closely related in price compared to a grow bag. And then I find that ceramic pots, especially if they're very ornate, and especially as they get larger, are by far the most expensive. Now, probably the most work goes into creating them, so that makes sense. But if you're looking for a lot of containers for your garden, you don't want to fill it with just ceramic pots unless you have the budget to do that. So that's why I like to incorporate a range of these containers, and the larger container I need, I shift towards the cheaper material, because I would rather save some money on the container type and spend more money on my plants. Now, the next category I'm going to order by is one that I think is really important, but maybe might not be the first thing that comes to your mind when you're choosing a pot, and that is water retention. So which pots retain water the best and which have the least water retention, aka the best drainage. So honestly, if I just swap these two around, although these last two are pretty even, this is the order from most well draining to least well draining. And depending on the needs for your garden, your environment, your plants, something that's incredibly well draining doesn't mean it's a better container than something that's not as well draining. So, grow bags. These are going to hold the least amount of water. They will dry out the fastest. They'll provide the best drainage for your plants. You don't even need a drainage hole in grow bags because the entire bag itself is porous. So the water comes out basically everywhere in the grow bag. Then you have terracotta, specifically unglazed terracotta. So this is still a porous material. It's not as porous as a grow bag, but water is going to leak out of all surfaces of this pot. That's why if you are growing houseplants in terracotta pots and you have a unglazed terracotta saucer, you don't want to set it on wood because the moisture is going to seep through the terracotta and onto your wood. That's why I have like all of my terracotta pots either on glass or plastic saucers. Then we have any sort of glazed ceramic, glazed terracotta potting. That glaze makes the material not as porous, and therefore it's going to hold on to water. And then the last one, plastic, non-porous material, going to retain the moisture. So when you're making decisions for your garden, some of the things I think about for me is that I know we get a lot of rain in Chicago. And in the past few years, we've gotten a lot of rain in the cool spring weather, which means that it's not that hot outside and the water isn't evaporating from the soil in my pots that quickly. So I've had issues with root rot in some of my containers because, especially in plastic or glazed ceramic, it's going to hold on to the water. So if we're getting a lot of rain, there really isn't anything I can do about the amount of moisture that these pots are holding on to. And I have lost a few plants, again, typically either in the spring or fall when the weather is cooler, but I have lost plants to root rot, unfortunately. So grow bags do work really well for me in my environment because I know if we get a lot of rain, I've never lost a single plant to root rot in a grow bag. I don't think I've lost one in terracotta either, but I tend to use like smaller terracotta pots than grow bags. So these might also dry out faster just because of the size. But I really like these, again, in my environment and my garden because it means that they're not going to be as impacted by the amount of rain that we get. Now, on the other hand, though, if I, for example, have pots that maybe they're under a place that's covered, maybe it's a plant that likes a little bit more moisture, or if it is a plant where I don't have it hooked up to my drip system and I don't want to have to remember to manually water it as often, that's where these type of pots come in handy for me. So I don't mind using plastic in my garden despite the amount of rain, but I do tend towards larger containers for plastic. So if I'm planting something in, again, like a 16, 18, 20 gallon plastic pot, because there's more soil in it, I have less of an issue with root rot. I have more of an issue with that in smaller plastic. In fact, this I don't even use in the garden. This is for my house plants where I control the moisture 100%. Now, if you live in a really dry climate where you don't get a lot of rain and you don't want to have to water every day, you might want to go more towards either glazed or plastic pots because it's going to hold on to that moisture a little bit longer. And then also the type of plant you're growing. Again, if you're growing a plant that doesn't like as much water, err more towards on the more porous container types. So again, not something I think that you go into thinking when you're looking at the pots at a garden center, but one of the most important things I consider now that I have the years of experience that I do when I'm doing a pot selection for my plants in my garden. All right, next, something that I think every gardener should also think about, but will be more important depending on your environment, is weight of the pots. So let's reorder these in terms of weight, with the heaviest on this end and the lightest on this end. Now, why weight matters to me quite a bit is that because my gardens are on the 3rd story, I have to carry everything up 2 flights of stairs, and a lot of things I also have to carry down 2 flights of stairs at the end of the season. So because of that, I need to make sure I can actually physically carry up the pots that I need. That's why, not going on too much of a tangent, but there's the new lightweight aqua pot series that came out because I love the idea of the aqua pot, but it was ceramic, the original one, and I absolutely could not carry it up here. Another important thing when it comes to weight is if you are, again, gardening on a rooftop deck or a balcony, you want to be aware of deck capacity and not overloading the capacity of your deck. So it might make more sense to stick to lighter weight containers. If you don't have to carry it upstairs, let's say, you still might want to move your pots around the deck, and that's going to be a lot easier with the lighter weight. So grow bags are obviously the most lightweight containers, then plastic, then terracotta, and ceramic. Now these can be pretty similar, but I do find especially the glazed ceramic to be the heaviest. And when you get large enough, there's some pots I can barely pick up, and that's before adding all of the soil to them. So you might think, you know, like this pot, I can carry it fine, but then fill it with soil and a plant, and it's gonna be a little bit more difficult. So just for the safety of my deck, for the ease of me being able to move plants around, for anything that I know is either going to need a lot of soil, that's gonna have a lot of area to it, anything that I'm gonna maybe need to move quite a bit, I will put it in here. So for example, I right now have some perennials in the garage, down the 2 flights of stairs. Those I'm gonna have to keep in plastic pots because I either won't be able to or don't want to go through the effort of carrying them all down in a ceramic pot. I actually have a hydrangea out there right now that I did plant in a ceramic pot a couple of years ago that I can't carry, so it's tarped, and I hope that it survives. But if you want to be able to move them around easily, go for more lightweight containers. Now, if you do have some heavy containers that you love, something I just did in this last year, 2023, that I wish I'd done earlier, is to get wheeled platforms and put the pots on that. So that way you can easily move them at least around the deck. It doesn't help with, you know, inside, up and down stairs, but getting them from one part of the deck to the other, if they're on wheeled platforms, it makes life so much easier. And I'll link down below, like the grow bags, the pot lifts, everything that I talk about, I will link down below so that you can start planting your garden now. So that is weight. Now let's go into insulation. And this is going to be kind of related to how porous a material is, because not only does something that's more porous mean that the water is going to go in and out more easily, but also heat will go in and out more easily. So with grow bags, for example, if you have really, really hot days, or if you live in a really, really hot climate, these are not going to hold on to that heat, because one of the issues is that you can overheat the root system and burn the roots. So this is going to be great for those environments. And then we have terracotta. Again, the airflow to the roots is going to be better. Now, on the other hand, if you're going to leave something outside in a container over winter, you probably don't want it to be in a grow bag because there's absolutely no protection for the root ball. So anything I know that I am going to have to leave outside, which isn't a ton right now, but for example, my holly trees, those are in plastic. Now I could get a really, really thick ceramic pot that would be even more heat retentive, but it comes into the weight factor. So all of these factors kind of play off of each other. So when I'm looking for a large pot that I can easily move around, that will hold heat a little bit better and give a little bit more protection in the winter, I will go with plastic. So that's kind of my thought process behind what I plan to leave outside, which pot I'm going to select. Now an issue, like I said, really thick ceramic might be a little bit more protective, but it might not withstand the cold temperatures. So let's rearrange these now for what's most likely to break over winter and least likely to break over winter. So shifting these down, I know that all of my terracotta pots are coming inside with me for the winter. In fact, they are all stacked up. They look really nice underneath this table that I'm working on. So I know everything that I'm planting in my garden in terracotta is an annual that I'm going to pull at the end of the season. I do use it for my herbs, although some herbs are perennial. I could move them in. I probably will next year. But I know that I can't put anything into this pot that needs to stay outside. For me, especially unglazed terracotta cracks pretty easily in the cold weather. Now, the glazed ceramic, the glazing does give it a little bit of protection, and I have left out ceramic pots. There's some on my front stairs, 2 of them. One has a crack in it, one doesn't. And then I left out 2 giant ceramic pots that are now inside because I think I'm going to use them for houseplants, and those never cracked. And we get some pretty cold temperatures here in Chicago. So these are less likely to crack than these, but I still stress out every winter. So I wouldn't put in a giant tree that's going to stay out over winter, because let's say this was a 20-gallon pot and then it cracked. Well, now I have to repot that tree into something else. So I'd rather just keep it in a plastic pot that I know isn't going to crack in the winter like a ceramic or terracotta would. Now, not that I would recommend overwintering, again, anything in a grow bag, but at least it's not going to crack over winter. So I have actually left out my 30-gallon grow bags outside every winter for 5 winters now, because I got them in 2019. I've moved with them. I don't bring them in. They're too large and the soil stays in them. And it's not until this past year that I noticed a tear in it, which is not from leaving out over winter. I don't know. It'd probably be more protected if I brought it inside, but that's 5 years for a $6 bag. That's a little bit over $1 a year before I need to replace it. Replacing it's going to be an interesting task, but that's why I got these new grow bags to replace it with. So I've been able to get like 5-ish years out of a grow bag. I also leave out my grow bags, my smaller ones, again, not with plants in them, but with soil, and then I shove them up against my other pots as insulation. I think I did a video on that. I'll link that down below, how I insulate, especially using other containers in the garden. But for me, these, even though it's probably giving them more wear and tear, have been just fine being left out over winter. So that's where I store most of mine. If I do bring them in, I empty out the soil, I hose them down, I might run them through the washing machine, and then I'll fold them in the closet. For the most part, these stay out over winter just fine. These I try to move inside for sure. Then let's do one more category that is 100% going to be opinion and not fact-based, and that is aesthetics. Now, no offense to grow bags, but I don't think you're the prettiest, so I'm gonna shift that down there. And although there are some very detailed, pretty plastic pots, I still just love the look of terracotta and ceramic more. So depending on the aesthetics that you prefer, it's been something I go back and forth on, because I do love how grow bags function. I don't necessarily love how they look. Now, somebody did have an idea of, with smaller grow bags, like putting them then inside of a larger, more decorative pot so you can't really see it. I love that idea. I might try it this year with some of my smaller ones. But in general, I don't think they're the prettiest. I am always on the lookout for really pretty grow bags, so if you know of any, but for the most part, the ones I find, you know, they come in black, they come in green, and they come in beige. My beige ones, I like the lighter color, but they get stains from the soil. At least the black hides the stains. So functional, great. Cost, great. Look, you're not ugly, but I don't love you the most out of all of these. So then these are kind of the prettier side of things. This is a very basic pot, but I have some very detailed, pretty plastic pots as well that I love. But oh, my heart just goes to terracotta pots, especially as they age. This to me is like the quintessential gardening pot. Like when I think of gardening or greenhouses, terracotta pots always are the first in my mind. And then, now not necessarily this one. I don't love the color yellow for pots. I'm actually giving this pot to a friend. But I have some really beautiful, I'm looking over to see if I can, I'm not gonna pick it up, it's too heavy. But I have some beautiful ceramic pots. And now because they are so pretty, like I mentioned, the ones that I used to use outside, I'm moving inside because I don't want them to break outside during the winter. So I love them so much, I would rather keep them inside and safe. But aesthetics in the garden, I mean, that's gonna be completely up to you. Maybe some people do love the look of grow bags, but in terms of how pretty, when I'm looking at a pot, these ones are usually at the top of my list. But it's honestly probably the least important on my list of all these categories, because I really need to make sure, like, I'm not damaging my deck with weight, I'm not spending too much money, I can move my plants around, and those are all more important to me than just the aesthetics of my garden, because really, I mean, the plants are the star of the show, not the containers. There's one quick thing I want to mention that is pretty important. I don't know if I'm going to edit it into the section where I talk about this or add it here at the end. But when it comes to which materials are more porous, if you are gardening on a wooden deck or balcony, put something underneath them to protect your deck, because when this is full of wet soil, it's basically like a wet sponge sitting on wood. So I have my grow bags either on wheeled platforms or on little plant lifts. I don't find that pot feet work as well because the bags kind of like sag a little bit in the center at the bottom. So I would put these on top of something and not just leave them sitting on your deck. Similar to the terracotta, although I don't find it quite as much of an issue, but to be safe, I would put these on top of something. You can also put it on like a plastic saucer, whatever it might be, but something to keep it off of your deck so that your garden is not ruining the wood. So I hope this video was helpful. There's, again, clearly a bunch more container types. There's resin that works great. My raised beds are wood. Fiberglass, I know one guy that was growing giant evergreens on his deck. And I asked what he used because the pots were huge. And he said fiberglass because those are really easy to carry up. So there's a bunch of different materials, but these are just the ones I find are most easily available, most used in the garden. So let me know if you have any other questions down below, any categories I didn't cover. Let me know what types of pots you kind of go for the most. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.